Okay. So, if you are here live, we already said hello, and if you are tuning in after the fact, there's a late. I just finished saying I don't want us to get started because as soon as I do, there will be someone asking to be let in, and here we go. But there it goes. Welcome, Deborah. Hey, Deb. Okay, so you can see I've taken my position. I'll encourage you all to take any position that you can be reasonably confident that you can maintain for about 20 minutes. Okay, that's what we're going to do today. Just 20 minutes. A little bit. The first 3-4 minutes. I'm gonna talk you through it. I'm gonna kind of set the scene and give you a scenario. Okay. I want to say at the outset, I said it in the email that I sent. I send those emails out weekly, but it's worth reiterating again in person. Although last week we were talking about the tendency, or how sometimes that there would be people who would go to a yoga class and truly do their own thing, like not listen to the teacher and do their own poses and so on, or might just take shavasana. Like that's, see, even in the bias kind of creeps in, like that's not an equally valid choice as practice. It totally is. But it's a bit, I guess the difference is, like, I personally have not only no problem with that. When we're moving, if people are listening, like they're moving mindfully and they're listening in with what their body and mind and spirit and whatever need, wonderful. Because again, like, I'm just offering kind of a general set of instructions that may land less, more or less well with you. But it can be, I grant that people are maybe a little bit reluctant to do that, because especially if you're all in the same room. With Zoom, we don't have to worry about this. You can shut the camera and just do your own thing. We're all in downward dog and you're standing on your head or whatever. But with meditation, it's completely it's available to you all the time. All the time, even just for one moment. Like if you want to dip your toe into the meditation pool, it's always there. And it's certainly not the only brilliant aspect, but one brilliant aspect is no one needs to be any the wiser. So I'm going to take you through, a practice, one that actually I initially designed for a friend who I'm sitting with regularly. But it's a mindfulness-based practice, or what might be called a Vipassana practice, an insight-based meditation. And we're going to work today with our thoughts. But in the same way that working with, like, for some people, focusing on breath, or, Larissa, we were talking about body scans. It's interesting, when I was being trained to teach yoga and meditation, some of my peers were very, very concerned about the capacity for body scans to actually be triggering for people, that, specifically for people who have encountered trauma, that revisiting their body with intimacy is not a super fun practice, which I certainly grant, although it's a super important and valuable practice for many people, right? So we don't want to just toss it out the window. I guess what I would say is, when we get into meditation, if it's resonating with you, awesome. That's great. That's wonderful. And I always try to approach a sit with, especially with someone who I don't sit with normally, or if we're practicing in a way that isn't in my normal wheelhouse, it's like, awesome, here we go. Like, now we're cooking with gas. I'm really being exposed to a different take. Right? So that's cool. But maybe you're just not into that ever, or certainly today. Like, you're just like, you know what? I need just stillness. I just want to relax. Here's the brilliant thing. You can do that. Okay? So you don't need permission. You certainly don't need my permission. So again, everything is optional. Cool? Okay. So arranging yourself in a comfortable shape, whatever that might look like. We're not really concerned about looks. We're concerned about the feels. So just allowing yourself to sort of unwind here, or unspooling. And again, if that language works for you, cool. If it doesn't, ignore it. Chilling out. So our intention for today's practice is, as I said, we're going to take our thoughts themselves as our meditative object. Okay? So right off the bat, I should mention, like in my own practice, I actually day to day, my typical way of practicing is object-less. Okay, like I actually don't practice typically with a discrete focus on one thing, for reasons that we don't need to elaborate on here. But that's an example of what I mean. This isn't my go-to, and so it's kind of an interesting opportunity to stretch. So for the first few moments, just arriving and getting yourself into the mindset of a spectator, and a very specific type of spectator. So what I'm not speaking to or speaking about here is the idea of you being at a sporting event or a concert or anything, or social media perhaps. What we're not doing is being involved. Okay, so our job here, meditatively speaking, is simply to sit back, not so far back that we get too relaxed and zone out of the practice, but to relax, to stay present as much as possible, simply returning to our object when we get distracted. And that being distracted and coming back tends to be the biggest part of the practice, but I'm going to add to it today. We're going to try not to exceed the role of spectator. So you might think of this as being you at the theater or the opera or something, and it's okay. The opera's not your jam. That's all right. That's fine. Not really my thing either. But what I was aiming for, like the library, somewhere where you've got to be quiet and at a remove. Okay. The tendency is when we're watching our train of thoughts or watching a particular story that's taking place in our heads, we can become an active participant in the drama, or we can take on particular roles. So rather than being a member of the audience watching a play on stage, we become the star of the show. These stories are often self-centered. We become the theater critic, particularly of our own performance, and often of the performance of others. That person dropped their line. That person doesn't look right. What were they thinking? And what if there's a glitch in the show? What if things kind of come unglued, or there's a disruption, or something else happens? We may see ourselves as a kind of de facto stage manager, or otherwise as a problem solver. But I'm going to invite you for the next just under 20 minutes now to relax back and just enjoy the show. Just watch what's happening without seeking to identify with it, play with it, deconstruct it, or criticize it. And I should say one more thing before I leave you, and this is by design. I'm going to leave you now with that kind of bare setup. Leave you in silence for a few minutes to do just that, to watch your thoughts. And notice what's happening. Is it a coherent, consistent story? Are you following that through? Or is it a series of images, almost like we're not in the theater anymore, but we're flicking channels on Netflix? I don't want to watch that, I don't want to watch that, I don't want to watch that. Okay? Either way, you're the spectator. You don't have the remote control. So things are jumping around. That's the show. If there's a break, if you don't see any thinking at all, and that can happen, quite natural. As soon as we pull our attention deeply into a thought, it might strengthen, but it also might dissipate, kind of skitter away. That's cool too. If that happens, You just think, oh, okay, I'm just going to rest and just wait. The show will restart. Trust me, the show will restart. It's almost like the play is in an intermission. So you can just relax, wait for it to restart. Okay, good. Now, staying with what you're thinking, if my cues are counterproductive to that, it's audience noise. It's nothing that you have to deal with if you don't want to. But I'll just point out at this point that the invitation here is to drop multitasking. Even when we are just sitting, maybe looking blankly, not moving around a whole lot, not doing much of anything apparently. You may have had the experience of, in fact, attending to quite a bit. We can be involved in more than one task at once. But remember, you're just a spectator. In fact, if this appeals to you, because I kind of like this way of thinking about it, so if it works, let me try this one on for size. If you go to the play or you're watching a movie at the theater, something that we perhaps are hoping to return to, these aspects of quote-unquote normal human existence sometime in the near future. It's not your responsibility to deal with something like if the film breaks or if an actor drops a line or someone in the crowd creates a disturbance. There are mental equivalents to all of those things. But you've got your ticket. You've been admitted. All you need to do is watch. And you can also drop in a little note if that helps. If you feel like the thoughts are a little bit too slippery, you're getting distracted by feelings in your body or sounds in your environment, or you're getting pulled into the story and start getting emotionally or analytically involved. If any of these things happen, one, totally okay, totally normal. just back out of that, back off. No problem for you to solve. Nothing for you to do. You can just add the note of thinking, thinking, thinking. Again, silently, just as a way of staying connected to what's actually your intention. And if nothing comes up, resting. We're past our midway point. If you've lost the thread, physically or mentally or emotionally, just pick it back up. Every moment is an opportunity to start again. We're never doing it wrong. You can't be a bad spectator. I mean, I know you can be a bad spectator, but not here. But let's talk about you a little bit, okay? Let's just ever so slightly divide our attention. So still watching the play or scanning those titles on Netflix. Again, we don't control our thoughts, you notice? If I asked you to predict what the next bit of the story would be or the play would be, couldn't possibly know what it is until it pops in there, right? Until it enters the stage of your awareness. And you shine that light of attention onto it. And yet, the thoughts come. So let's take a quarter of your attention, just part of it, and turn it on yourself. There you are sitting in your seat, watching the show. What's that like? What's your attitude like right now? It's just about naming it. Just for a moment, and then letting it go. So you might be lost, engrossed, like you've lost your sense of self. Okay? might be impatient or frustrated or performing one of those roles that I discussed earlier: critic, director. The best observer is one who, or I should say most skillful, most effective. It's not, again, not really about judging our efficacy. But the skilled observer allows themselves to drop all those other judging and planning and thinking and reflecting, and just be. Again, we can't necessarily control our attitude in this moment, but if you were going to give yourself a little nudge to that person in the audience, to ask is to be open, to be curious, to be genuinely invested in what's happening up on stage. So rounding the curve here, entering the final minutes here of our sit. I'm just going to drop in one last approach or kind of tool in the toolkit here. I mean, there are many, many more, but one more for today. Okay, so here it is. And it does, we got to be careful with this one because it can become, we don't want it to overtake the process. In other words, we don't want to get thinking about our thinking too much. We want to stay observing. But you might begin to note patterns. If you have you're a bit of a veteran and you have a practice of insight meditation, or it could be anything, it could be, reflecting in a diary or talking to a therapist. Important to note, these are practices, these and others, that may be more appropriate on a given day or all the time compared to meditation, but it just depends on the person. But the pattern seeking, or not so much seeking as noting, it is useful, or at least it's potentially, it can be not so much entertaining as something we can learn from, that we can truly gain insight from. So maybe now noticing some of the contours of that mental ground that you've covered up on that stage. Where does your mind tend to go? Might be traveling to daydreams and fantasies and wish fulfillment. Things that can feel really good, like really a fun play to watch. Or we can jump into catastrophism, living the full catastrophe. This I like, that I don't, this I want, that I don't, da 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 da, on it goes, ba ba ba. So, again, we can get frustrated by that, or we can learn from it. Aha, aha, I know this theater. This is the one that, it likes to run the play about worrying. They're showing my favorite production, the one about X, whatever your thing is, or things. And you're still the spectator, though. You don't have to do anything, at least initially, with that information. But just tracking it and noticing it, it opens up another possibility, and that is that you might sense these patterns, and it might give you pause in the course of your daily life before speaking hastily or reacting without fully considering what's actually going on, and how your own particular way of seeing things might be drawing you into life in a certain way, in a way that might be more or less helpful. So keep watching that play, those thoughts, but also just noting, oh yeah, it's that again, or it's that. Just a final moment or two here. So if you've lost your train, or if I've taken you out of it, let's drop back in like you've just taken your seat. The show has never really stopped. What's happening? Tune in now. Just observing. Before we begin to move and we begin to think about leaving the theater of our mind, first, I think it's, if you'll excuse the extension of the metaphor, it's an opportunity to perhaps not applaud, but to be thankful that you were able to enjoy the show, even if you didn't enjoy the show. But just being mindful of your own capacity for okayness, for being okay with your thoughts. Because they're just thoughts. They're not, well, they're real. They may be real to you, but they're not, they're fleeting, and they're not, there's no substance to them necessarily. So, like any play, like we wouldn't go to a play or watch a movie and, assuming it's not a documentary, make the mistake of thinking, oh, this is real life, or this is necessarily true. And nor would we listen to those stories and take direction from them about how we should act or react, or what we should think about things. I mean, we might be moved, even moved to tears by the stories that we encounter. But they're just stories. All right, and we're just spectators. Let's let the world come back in, maybe bringing a little bit of movement back into your body in a way that seems appropriate. One other thing, particularly if you, this is the cue here, the words I'm using are not mine. They're like truly one of the all-stars, the superstars of, certainly in North America, of meditation. Gentleman, and I do mean gentleman. I've never met him actually personally, but I have read his work and listened to and sat his sits. A gentleman by the name of Joseph Goldstein. And he, good long while ago now, one of the practices that I was following of his, he talked about, he had received the question about what do we do when or if we get trapped or feel like we are stuck in a loop of thought. If our thoughts are somehow running beyond us and overwhelming us. In other words, if you're tuning in mindfully to the pattern and you kind of just like, this isn't serving me, this isn't helping me. And I think this has stuck with me because it's a very, visually it works at least as an analogy, and it's the idea of using the sword of wisdom to cut through, like literally go, enough, because the point here is, as much as I just wanted to throw that in at the end, as much as we're watching our thoughts and can learn from them, and so there are a number of different merits to a practice like this. The simple fact that we are allowing things to arise and pass away as every phenomenon will, thoughts included, it doesn't mean that we have to stay in the theater if the show is counterproductive, right? If our thoughts are getting in the way of things, or are no longer helpful. So if you do hit one of those points, and maybe not right in the middle of the meditation, but there's maybe the insight at the end. You're like, there I go again. One common one for me, since the pandemic hit, has been I've noticed by the way, I mention this because I think all of you know, I think it's almost my duty as a yoga and meditation instructor to demystify and in particular to demystify this seat, like that of the teacher, by not hiding the work, the practice. So like in my mind over the last little while, I have noticed where I get caught up in stories that are all about judging, what I deem to be, or my mind, the thoughts that are coming up about people misbehaving, not wearing their masks, not respecting the rules, jumping the queue, blah, 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 blah. And that stuff's happening, right? Like I had a conversation with my parents, and my dad, who is just about 70 years old, got into a confrontation with someone at the grocery store about not wearing a mask, and that I'm worried about him, but it's not just worried about them. The thoughts then become, what's going to happen when people get vaccinated and stop wearing it, and this happens and that happens, and there's a confrontation, and truly there have been points where in the past where I would be 5 or 10 or 15 minutes into creating this whole mindscape that's never happened and probably never will, and it's not really all that helpful or useful. So that's where the sword comes in. It's just like, whew, I don't need that. That's not necessary. And you see the pattern and you cut it off and you're free. And then it's just like, oh, right. Okay. And again, for me, everyone, how you react in that moment to that realization is going to vary. For me, it's a good reminder. It's like, oh, right, you're anxious or you're concerned about these things. And I try to basically just sprinkle a little bit of kindness on it all. Can I be good to myself? Can I see the good in people rather than assuming the worst? Yeah, so there it is. All the world's a stage, nothing more so than our minds. So hopefully that landed with you. Anything that anyone in the group wants to ask or add, or and again, you don't have to. It's enough to let it sit. Deborah, I sensed a little bit of self-deprecating sarcasm directed your way. I love it that you're talking. Go. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Hey. Mm. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm. 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 Yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. Mm. Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Mm. Mm-hmm. Awesome, awesome. And I think that, sorry, I'm going to try to like quickly summarize. I realized I've got the camera running and no one got that. The watching at home later and thing would have gotten the whole detail. But insofar as those insights, like we have a tendency to miss a particular emphasis or to be able to reorient ourselves to something that we're familiar with, like you're saying, Deb, with the things that you've observed out your window. Um, so I think that like that's wonderful. I've got nothing to add to to that other than say, like, Godspeed. That sounds great. If you can. Wow, you're taking my word for it. Well, yeah. I mean, I always, what I tend to say to my it's ironic because I teach. My day job still at the moment is teaching teenagers about the law. which is inherently a judgmental business, right? And yet I encourage them as much as possible to consider their own opinions as highly suspect, as super contingent on their own like kind of social location and their cultural baggage that we all carry and all the rest of it. And so it kind of behooves, I encourage them, and I encourage all of us, me especially, to really think less about, right and wrong, and more about, better and, more and less skillful or more and less useful approaches to a particular thing. Like I suspect if you're talking about people causing a bunch of, irritating or maybe even dangerous social, people pooping in the lane, that doesn't sound like super great neighborly behavior. But, as you quite rightly point out, the missing dynamics in our own storytelling, right? Like no story exists on its own. It's also like there's the story and there's the audience, and we could all be lined up in those windows watching the scene and have very, very different takes. So I think just having the counter narrative, I think, is the win. You did it right. You did it 100% right. Yeah, whoop whoop. And it doesn't have to be positive either necessarily. I actually did this. I broke out this practice myself. Here's an example of situationally, like you were saying, Deb, that you could see applying it situationally. I was reading an article. I just had an article that popped up, and it was all stuff that was kind of relevant to me. It was a criticism of teachers not being in school. And it was written by a virologist, an epidemiologist, and so it caught my attention that, hey, my survival brain kind of kicked in and went like, hey, you're being criticized, even though there's nothing to do with me. He's American, it's not me. But anyway, I rather than get angry, I did in fact get angry as I read the article, but what I tried to do was to reorient my experience and actually say, aha. Isn't this interesting? Why this reaction? Just watch the show. And so I actually proceeded to read the article, and in time was watching my own reaction to it. And the insight was actually what I was angry about wasn't what he was writing about. It was about something kind of on a parallel track. But I hadn't been able to make that connection in my own. I could have sat all day going, how am I going to work my way out of this problem? It wouldn't have happened. It was something about the kind of like letting go and just watching the ride, So, yeah. But again, like you say, it's Goldstein, and it's quite right. He's standing on the shoulders of giants, from Asia and the rest. So yeah, and that's great. Thank you for sharing that. You rock as usual. Anyone else they would like to weigh in, please don't be, no question is insignificant, and no share is unwelcome. And truly, it's just enough to say, like, yeah, okay, that was a practice. Nice to see you people. And that's it too. Okay, I'm just going to stop the other one. Goodbye out there in the interweb. Sorry, that wasn't for us Zoomers. That was for